Enoch, a life that defied common logic. Enoch was a man whose life defied common logic. While everyone was subject to death, he was taken by God before experiencing the natural end of existence. His name echoes through the scriptures as the symbol of a walk so intimate with the Creator that it broke the limits of the physical world. In a time when the earth still pulsed with the remnants of original creation, when the first descendants of Adam still filled the valleys and plains with their families, the human heart began to stray. The purity that once dwelt in the spirit of men gave way to a constant distancing from God. Like a flame that slowly extinguishes before the cold wind of growing corruption. The lineage of Seth, Adam's substitute son, preserves some echoes of that lost communion. It was in the midst of this lineage that Enoch was born. He carried in his veins the blood of those who had walked in Eden, but also the responsibility of carrying the legacy of a generation that struggled against decay. Enoch was not just one among many. From early on, his mind revealed a rare restlessness, as if an internal compass pushed him toward what was invisible. Unlike his contemporaries, who allowed themselves to be involved in the distractions of daily life, he seemed to live on another frequency, attentive to the subtle signs that whispered about a greater reality. Over time, his fame spread. People saw him as someone who had a brightness in his gaze, a silence loaded with wisdom, as if he heard voices that others could not capture. Enoch observed everything around him with reverence, not just as a spectator, but as someone who recognized the divine touch in every detail of nature, the sunrise, the sound of waters, the wind among the trees. All of this, for him, was a message from God. This silent connection grew, shaping his life so profoundly that his routine became an extension of his worship. In the solitude of sunsets or in the early mornings under the starry sky, Enoch meditated, not as someone who seeks answers in desperation, but as one who walks on a path where each step reveals more of what was hidden. People watched him from afar, not understanding why he avoided common pleasures and distanced himself from daily concerns. What they didn't know was that he was guided by something much greater. There was a gentle call, almost imperceptible, that became increasingly present, shaping his thoughts, his desires, and his purposes. It was on one of those silent nights, wrapped in prayer, that Enoch had a unique experience. He felt as if the very air around him vibrated with an intense presence. It was something invisible, but undeniable. A certainty grew within him, as if God himself was approaching with greater intensity. He didn't hear an audible voice, but his soul was pierced by a call he could not ignore. From that moment, his life changed. The things of the world began to lose their flavor, and a spiritual hunger took hold of his being. Enoch now knew he was invited to something much greater than mere survival. He chose to follow that call. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Following this path meant distancing himself from the paths trodden by the majority, rejecting the facilities of common life, and surrendering himself totally to God's will. Enoch, however, was willing. Something in his spirit knew that this was the only true road. With firm steps and a surrendered heart, he began to live so that every gesture, every thought, and every word were expressions of his faith. His journey was not guided by material rewards, but by the certainty that the Creator was guiding him to an eternal purpose. As time passed, Enoch stood out more and more. His presence caused amazement and admiration. There were those who respected him and those who avoided him. He didn't care. His greatest motivation was to be in constant communion with God. While men sought fleeting conquests, he found satisfaction only in the divine presence. It was as if he had discovered a parallel reality, invisible, but much more true than what the eyes could see. This reality gave him strength to continue, even when adversities arose. Even in the face of trials, his faith did not waver. There were days when everything seemed difficult, but a moment of silence was enough for him to feel God's presence, restoring his strength. This constant communion became his source of peace, his reason for existing. While the world sank into darkness, Enoch shone like a silent light, an example that it was still possible to live in righteousness. His faithfulness transformed him into a symbol, a spiritual anchor amid chaos. People began to notice that there was something different about him, something sacred, that made them reflect, even without fully understanding. And his transformation continued. The more he deepened in God's presence, the more his life became a bridge between the human and the divine. He didn't need great words. His varied existence was a living message. In his company, people felt a peace difficult to explain. It was as if heaven was always near when Enoch was around. Some were touched, others felt fear, but all perceived they were before someone different. Enoch didn't seek to be seen. He just faithfully followed what his soul knew is truth. And it was living this way, day after day, that Enoch became someone whose story would transcend centuries. His communion with God intensified so much that there was no longer any separation between his spirit and the divine. It was as if he lived between two worlds, present among men, but already rooted in eternal things. He saw beyond the visible, understood truths that escaped earthly logic. And, even with all this knowledge, he remained humble, dedicated, silent. His heart was not vain, he just deepened in the mystery. Then, at a certain point in his journey, God began to reveal visions. Enoch saw beyond the present. Images of future times invaded his mind. Judgments, warnings, divine justice upon the earth. He understood that evil would not be ignored. Forever there would be a day when the Creator would intervene. These revelations were intense, loaded with responsibility. Even so, Enoch accepted the weight of his mission. He felt he needed to warn, even knowing he would be but his obedience spoke louder than the fear of human judgment. Enoch continued to walk with God, day after day, like one who walks toward an already traced destiny. His heart, full of peace and reverence, knew that something was approaching. And, without realizing it, his constant faithfulness led him to live the impossible. He was taken by God, without passing through death, not for having sought this, but for having walked so intimately with the Creator that his life no longer belonged to this world. And thus his story remains as a lighthouse lit in the darkness of time, reminding everyone that it is possible to live in full communion with God to the point where heaven simply takes us close to Him. A mirror for today. Enoch's journey is not just a story told in the distant past, it is a mirror for today. A silent reminder that even in times of darkness, it is possible to choose to walk in light. The world around may lose itself in confused voices, in races, for power, glory, and approval. But Enoch's testimony cuts through this noise with a clear message. True greatness lies in living a life that pleases God, even if it means walking against everything the world values. Communion with the Creator is the highest point of human existence. And that is what Enoch showed us with his life, not with great public feats, but with silent faithfulness, with constant dedication, with a heart that beats for the eternal. In the midst of a world increasingly spiritually disconnected, Enoch shines as a beacon of intimacy with God, reminding us that it is still possible to live a faith that transforms, that elevates, that makes us touch the invisible, even with our feet firmly on the ground of reality. When we think of Enoch, we are led to reflect on what really matters in our own lives. Are we seeking to walk with God, or are we just following an empty religious routine? Do we hear the divine whisper inviting us closer, but ignore it because we are too distracted by the noise of the world? Enoch had no access to the scriptures, saw no miracles like the prophets, nor needed great manifestations to believe he simply walked with God. This is the essence of faith. A journey of trust, even when the path seems invisible. Today, his example echoes as an invitation for us to return to the simple, to the essential, so that, like him, we can live in such a way that God's presence is not just a distant belief, but a constant reality in our choices, words, and thoughts. Enoch shows us that, yes, it is possible to walk with the Creator to the point where this communion becomes so strong that heaven already begins to embrace us right here on earth. In a time when everything seems ephemeral, when faith is often treated as something symbolic or outdated, Enoch's testimony resurfaces as an incontestable truth. He proves to us that God continues to be a God of relationship, who values sincere hearts more than theatrical gestures. His life was a testimony not only for those who lived in his time, but for all future generations, a reminder that living in holiness is possible, that God's presence can be as real as anything we can see or touch. While so many seek visible miracles, Enoch found the greatest of all, living so close to heaven that earth could no longer contain him. This is a truth that challenges us, that calls us to reevaluate where we have placed our priorities, and whether we are truly hearing God's voice or just following the noise that surrounds us. Because Enoch's life was more than a story. It was a path traced, so we could see where each step toward the Creator can lead us. An eternal invitation. Enoch's message extends as an eternal invitation to all who, in the midst of their struggles, long for something deeper. He was an ordinary man in a corrupt generation, but who chose to live extraordinarily through communion with the eternal. This is the good news. It is not necessary to be perfect, nor to possess supernatural gifts, just a willing heart, a soul that decides, day after day, to say yes to God. Each step we take toward the Creator shapes who we are becoming. And like Enoch, we can live a faith that transforms us from within until our entire being reflects divine glory. May his story awaken us from that spiritual apathy that so often dominates us, and lead us to seek that place of intimacy with God where true peace dwells. Perhaps we will not be taken like him, but we can live in such a way that, even in the midst of life's storms, our soul walks with security, sustained by the certainty that we are beside the Father. Enoch teaches us that the secret is not in achieving great feats, but in keeping the heart aligned with heaven. While many live running after fame, status, or visible achievements, he reminds us that the greatest treasure is to be known by God, to be someone whom the Creator himself looks at and recognizes as a friend, as a child, as someone who chose to walk with him even when no one else did it. Enoch left no monuments, founded no cities, conquered no kingdoms, but he left an eternal example, a spiritual legacy that survived the centuries. In his simplicity, he taught us what it is to live a life with purpose, an existence that crosses time and touches God's heart. And now, his story echoes like a silent prayer, like a loving invitation to all who desire more than this world can offer, more than the eyes can see, more than the senses can reach. It is the search for this more that transforms lives, that redefines destinies, that reveals the true meaning of living. If Enoch's story touched your heart, allow it to become more than just a narrative. Transform it into inspiration. Look at your own life and ask yourself, in which direction am I walking? Are my steps taking me closer to God or away from Him? Enoch didn't wait for the world to change to begin walking with God. He began alone, even when everything around said otherwise. And today, this same courage can dwell in you. You can be the one who chooses faith in the midst of doubt, light in the midst of darkness, the voice of heaven in the midst of the world's noise. And just like Enoch, you can live a story that will be remembered not for what you conquered, but for the way you walked with God. May this journey begin now with a simple step toward the divine presence, because in the end, there is no safer, more transforming, more eternal path than walking with the Creator. Until the next video, stay with God.